So we have heard already from some really amazing speakers, including Commander Hadfield, who gave us the view from space. Metaphorically, we are now going to move from that big picture, out in the universe, out in the stratosphere perspective, down to the brass tacks of what it takes to lead in an organization in the province of Alberta. So what we're going to do to accomplish that is to bring 4 individuals who are leaders in organizations in Alberta onto the stage to talk about leadership from diverse backgrounds, different genders, different generations, different industries, and with a different exposure to leadership to really get at these questions in a nuanced and textured and actionable way. So please join me in welcoming the panelists for our next discussion. Come on up, everybody. I will introduce them, I promise. I will introduce them. These chairs are a total health risk. So we came and did a dress rehearsal on the chairs so that we wouldn't have a big incident. I'm going to just give you their basic names and titles, and then we'll have more of a conversation as I go. Sitting to my immediate left, Lorne Rubis, the Chief People Officer at ATB Financial, followed by... okay, so that was clearly ATB. So ATB, was that a Microsoft? So ATB, if you're going to, and I love that you supported Lauren so beautifully, you need to see that response and raise it for the remainder of our panelists, okay? Our next panelist is Anna Murray, Talisman Energy Senior Advisor, Corporate Affairs. All right, now Microsoft, not to be outdone, your person is next. Mike Hilton, Microsoft Canada Western Regional Director. Good, very good. And now you can all work together on this one. Arlene Strom, Vice President, Sustainability and Communications with Suncor Energy. Welcome. So here are our panelists. I'm going to start with you, Lauren. University of Alberta, education degree, Masters of Science from the University of Oregon, and you've worked in lots of different companies, lots of different industries, including the LA Kings, which is pretty cool. You were CEO of RiseX, am I pronouncing that right? Privately held international tech company. And now you're at ATB as the Chief People Officer. My question to you first, what is that? What does that mean?
So the Chief People Officer has this wonderful mandate given by our board and our CEO and the rest of the organization to lead ATB towards being the place to work and to bring story and evidence that we arguably can be in that quadrant that is one of those organizations that is responsibility of the Chief People Officer to bring the strategy and process to contribute to that.
You think a lot about leadership. You practice a lot in the area of leadership. Can you give me an example of a mentor that you have had at some point in your career and what they have taught you about leadership?
The mentors that I've had have mostly been a collective. Of course, people stand out. Bruce, as an example, I worked for Tim Lywicki, who's, a fair amount of infamy right now around the Toronto area, of course. And Tim, as an example, taught me the power of doing it now. I'd never met an executive who put acceleration to a big idea the way he did. At the same time, a lot of these particular leaders, because leadership is not about perfection, there are also things that I learned not to do. And
right.
But definitely mentorship has been a huge collective for me that's been a profound impact for my leadership framework.
All right, Anna Murray, Talisman Energy, Corporate Affairs. You have worked in the past at the United Nations, Glencore Strata, HSBC, and you're also the founder of Young Women in Energy, which sounds like a pretty cool organization. MBA UBC, you're currently pursuing a law degree part-time University of Calgary while raising a child. And Anna also speaks Mandarin, Spanish, and French, which is kind of like, of course, who doesn't, right? I do, certainly, Mandarin and all those languages. You have a whole bunch of great credits, but I want to ask you about Young Women in Energy and where that fits in the mosaic of what you do. They'll find you. Just speak away.
Otherwise, I'll have to yell very loudly. We founded Young Women in Energy well over a year ago. It's one of the fastest growing networks in Calgary. The idea is that we founded this organization to empower young women who work in the energy industry, whether directly for energy companies or with, so downstream, upstream, what have you. We have well over 1,300 members so far, and it's been fantastic.
Right. And
Yeah.
when you think about a mentor or someone in your career who has taught you about leadership, who would that person be, and what would you say you learned from them?
I would say it was a female boss I had probably about 10 years ago. It was toward one of the story that sort of sticks out in my mind. So it was towards the end of the day. I had a meeting with her at about 5 o'clock, and that's when the cleaning crew comes in. So the cleaning woman came into my office, and I said hello. And I thought I was so grounded and connecting with everybody in the organization. She went about cleaning my office, and then I went into my boss's office at the time, and the same woman came in. The difference was that my boss knew her by name, greeted her with in her own language, and made the effort to go the extra mile. So what I took away from Dominique was that everybody plays a critical role on the team, and it's always important to acknowledge and respect everyone on your team, regardless of how prominent their role is.
That's great. That's great. Thanks, Anna. Mike, you're next. Western Regional Director, Microsoft. Prior to that, you were president of Synaptic Solutions. Did I pronounce that right? Synaptic Solutions. Your Bachelor of Applied Sciences from Simon Fraser University in Vancouver. You currently live in Vancouver. We apologize about the snow. Really, it's not intentional. When you think about this question of leadership and what you have learned in your career, one of the things that you've learned, who springs to mind for you?
Yeah, I think the thing that always jumps out is feedback, right? Feedback's critical for personal development. Feedback's critical for how you grow as an individual. But it's important that that feedback is genuine. And so I think about mentors that I've had where they were incredibly honest and sometimes brutally honest. But because I respected them, because I trusted them, our natural instinct is to be very defensive when we get negative feedback or negative commentary. But when you have a mentor that you trust, when you have somebody that you respect, and you know that that feedback is coming from a constructive place, even though it's a little bit negative, sometimes even downtrodden, you process it differently. And I think as a leader then, not only then do we have to learn to process that feedback, and sometimes that feedback comes from outside the organization, it comes from shareholders, it comes from a variety of people, but also learn how to land that it's part of a balanced approach, but land that constructive feedback in a way to give people what they need to move forward.
Thanks, Mike. Arlene, Suncor Energy, Vice President, Sustainability and Communications. But you have a very interesting route as to how you arrived at that current gig. You started off in packaged goods, sales and marketing, law school at UBC, a practicing securities lawyer, and then the legal department, first at Suncor. And here you are with one or two issues that you need to deal with on a given day, given that it's a hot issue for Canadians, for Albertans, and for the world right now. When you think about leadership and a lesson that you have learned along the way, who demonstrated that lesson and what was it?
Well, I'm going to start back in my consumer packaged goods career with a leader that I had at that time. His name was Don Ferrier, and he, the lessons that I learned from him still resonate with me today. He was one of these people who saw in the people around him great potential. And, by seeing that potential, we all wanted to live up to it. And, today, I still, even though he has actually passed away, since in the last 10 years, but I still think about what he expected of me because he saw potential in all of us, and it really inspired us to lift up our performance and to do better.
That's great.
So it's been a great lesson for me.
That's fantastic. I want to ask you, Lorne, to provide us some context for the conversation that we're having today, September 8th, 2014, versus what we might have been talking about 5 years ago, say. Because we've been talking about leadership in a business context for decades and decades and decades. Some of it is mom and apple pie, keep doing those same things, and some of it isn't. So what are some things that you would say you're thinking about, you're talking about today that you wouldn't have been 5 years ago?
I think, first of all, I think leadership as a concept, as you say, I think it needs a refreshed look. Nobody's going to argue that it's not vital, it's more important, it's going to continue to be important. I think what's happening is a mindset that that people have a right to have great leaders, and leaders have a responsibility to be great, not perfect, but to be great. And with that, I think comes a certain commitment to transparency. First of all, having the guts to be intentional in describing what leadership means, not just beyond the maxims of things like empowerment and some of these other terms, but very clear and specific definition of what it means, and then to really have leaders get the coaching and the practice. And that word that resonated from both Giuliani and others around practice.
Relentless preparation.
Relentless practice, but
Yeah.
though with, I think, transparency, because if it can be rated, it's going to be rated. If it can be posted, it's going to be posted. And I think leaders better be prepared to have their leadership performance very transparently posted.
Arlene, how would you answer that question? You've been in many different industries and in your career. What's different today versus 5 years ago?
Well, I think that transparency is, incredibly important. So I'm just going to build on what you were talking about, Lorne. But one of the things that I think is really important with that transparency then becomes how we tell a compelling story. Like, for example, in the energy industry, as we look forward over the next 10 or 20 or 30 or 50 years, we're going to be dealing with the challenges of climate change. And what is it going to take to get to a low carbon energy future? Well, one of the things that I deal with in my job is that engagement with, environmental NGOs, critics, academics, scientists, and through that we all agree that we need to get to a low carbon future. But we're dealing with, what's the compelling narrative around it? And so I think that being able to tell a compelling story and do it in a way that isn't polarizing is really different, and that's becoming increasingly important in today's environment.
Mike, what do you think matters most in maybe tech, but maybe the organization that you work for in terms of competencies? We've had lots of words, lots of ideas from Giuliani and Hadfield and others, optimism, communication, teamwork, all those kinds of things. If you were to pick one, if you were asked to pick one, and I'm asking you to pick one, if you were to pick one, what would be the one that you would focus on as being really, really critical?
Yeah, I think the one that really stands out is this concept of resiliency, and it kind of plays on the previous question on what's changed in the last 5 years. This sense of constant change. The number one message that comes from people is, when am I going to see the new normal? And we as leaders have to be educating people that, sorry, this is the new normal, right? We are in a state of constant change. Constant change is the new normal. And so you need people that are able to absorb that, to process that, to deal with that on a daily basis, that have this sense of resiliency. And, it's a scary thing to say to a large group of people, we're not going to reach an equilibrium again. There's not going to be this sense of 10 years of doing things the same. That is not the new normal. And that should not be perceived as a bad thing. That's an exciting thing. It's a great opportunity for us to continue to challenge ourselves on a regular basis. As leaders, our objective then is to recognize people that have resiliency, put them in positions of pseudo-leadership within a team. So they may not be a manager, but they're that influencer, that sort of locker room philosophy. And be able to start to build up people's capacity for absorbing change and coping with change. And I think that's the big thing that I look for.
Anna, younger people, and this may be a generalization, seem better at change than me. And I'm not 102, but I'm not 27 anymore. And I say that because younger people have been raised in an area of technological change that we can't even fathom as people who are more than years old. How would you have members of Young Women in Energy or folks at the company that you work for embrace that as something that they really bring to the table that might be harder for people who are older?
Specific to technological change?
It could be technological change. I mean, it seems like there's change everywhere.
Well, actually, I just recently had a conversation with a colleague of mine on exactly that. And I think specifically with the area of technological change, which I have yet to find a company that's truly embraced internal technological change. Sorry. Just in terms of, let me just get to my point here. In terms of something like LinkedIn, so an internal networking, providing employees with internal networking opportunities. the reason why is because people, again, generalizing, but from my generation, that's the way we are most comfortable shamelessly self-promoting ourselves. And it works sort of in a bi-directional way in that it's good for the employee as well as for the employer, in that if you have an internal networking tool where employees are able to promote themselves, what they're good at, the employer will also find that the employees are self-identifying as managers, as leaders. They're helping to identify gaps and problem solve. So I think that's probably an area that we can all learn to build on. Yeah.
Lorne, what advice do you have for leaders dealing with leaders within their organization who are struggling with complexity? Because it's just a whole other world than it was, both in terms of business issues, but also there was a simplicity to the siloed world. It was clear that HR had a function and finance had a function. There was much that didn't work, but it was clear in some ways. So how would you counsel people to manage that the reality of complexity?
I'm going to respond to that question. I just want to put a poke in for other generations around change just for a minute. Consider I represent maybe another part of the generation.
You're like Gen X.
Yeah, exactly. But I do believe that, I think, thanks for clarifying.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
But I do think Anna's point around, I think there are certain characteristics around that each generation has, but I think the expectation for managing all the rapid change has got to be applied to every single group. This relentless commitment to competence, and it has no finish line. Going to the complexity issue, I think we have to live in a world where first of all, leadership is flow. It's much more about flow than it is about particular functions.
What do you mean by flow?
Because things flow across organizations. Leadership is a system, and the way organizations deliver value is a matter of flow. It's not a matter of function. Who cares about sales or marketing really in the context of value? Customers care about value, what's given them. Leadership has to be a system that allows value to flow. But the issue about dealing with complexity is a matter of living in a paradox world as a leader. You've got to deal with complexity, but have the skill to tell things in simple story-like ways. You have to be strategic and tactical. So I think it's just recognizing that you have to be able to use story in other ways, but you have to just manage the paradox.
Arlene, what about ambiguity? This notion of ambiguity. And certainly there's tremendous uncertainty in your business and in the economic cycles, the price of the resources, all those sorts of things. How do leaders lead in ambiguity?
Well, it really is one of the challenges and one of the capabilities that we look for in leaders. I think, one of the real ways that we need to lead through ambiguity is to be able to set aside the time to think about problems, to focus on the problem. I think way too often we go to the short-term solution. We want to slap on a Band-Aid, move along, get the share price up, whatever the short-term solution is. But if we really focus on setting aside that time to focus on the problem, what is the root cause of the problem? What is the problem we're trying to fix? What is the outcome we're looking for? Those are the kinds of things that really help us to deal with ambiguity, and it's a challenge. There's so much in this world. There's so much coming at us all the time.
Yeah.
To set aside that time is a real challenge.
Yeah.
I think, Bruce, there's an interesting interplay between the concept of social networks and how to give people the tools necessary to manage communications and information related to this flow across functions. And then I think back to Rudy's story earlier today about asking someone to go back to their office and break the problem down into smaller pieces. There's nothing wrong with compartmentalizing complexity to then reassemble it to diffuse some of that ambiguity, and then relying on the tools, whether you use an external tool like Facebook or LinkedIn or an internal tool like Yammer, to be able to pull together a group of people that might be from disparate parts of the organization to say, well, how would you deal with this piece of the problem? And then assemble those little component solutions in to give you the ultimate end goal. And I think that's where we start to deal with how we manage ambiguity and complexity, is we don't do it on our own. We leverage the social and business networks that are both inside and outside our organizations.
I want to ask you a pointed question about technology, Mike. There are some technological innovations or applications that have made leading easier, and some that have made them a lot harder, right? And some that are both. When you ponder that notion, what are the ones that would fit into the different ends of that spectrum?
Yeah, clearly social networking as a collective, whether that be Twitter, Facebook, you name it, the alphabet soup of social network, is both a great tool and a scary, I won't say dangerous tool, I'm going to say scary tool, because there are ways to manage, as we often say, it's not whether you drop the ball, it's how you pick it up. And I think there are ways in which, great examples of where companies have had issues socially and dealt with them very well, and there are ways where they've dealt with them very poorly. And in a world of social network, in a world of crowdsourcing, or as I like to say, crowd storming, where the virtual villagers are racing up to the castle wall
with pitchforks and
torches,
and
there's an interesting set of opportunities there that you don't have to necessarily be scared of crowd storming as long as you are managing the process and managing the network appropriately. You're being transparent. I think we talked about that as a key leadership trait. We're being open, we're being honest, but we're also proposing solutions and looking for feedback from people to move forward constructively. So I think social networking is an area where there's both great opportunity and great potential issue. The other one, though, and I'll go back to Anna's commentary because I think it's very important, and especially in highly diverse global companies or geographically diverse companies, is how do I build on the collective knowledge? Chris talked about this idea that knowledge should not be competition, right? It is the lifeblood of the organization, and we have built a culture inside of organizations that whoever has the most knowledge wins. Whoever has the most knowledge moves up the ladder the fastest. And that's not, I think about Microsoft today, we've actually implemented a new performance regime where we actually measure people equally on what they've contributed and what they've consumed. And it's important that you consume as much as you contribute in order to help grow that knowledge base of the organization and share it amongst as many people as possible.
Interesting. Lorne, you mentioned Glassdoor ratings, Glassdoor.com, and I want to bring that up as a specific example as it relates to transparency. You should probably give the basic overview of what that is, just in case people aren't clear.
Yeah, so for those of you that haven't had a chance to get on Glassdoor, of course, people right now are rating all of our organizations, and our CEO, at least, of our organizations around anonymously rating how they feel about us. There's a 5-point scale they can rate on. And I think that I was just curious that USA Today, when they list their top 75 companies to work for in the US, the metric they used was Glassdoor's metric. And I think that metric is foreshadowing for the transparency that's going to be applied to leaders. I think somehow in a collective and certainly within organizations, leaders better be prepared to have their, quote, Glassdoor score up there for everybody to see in very, very clear ways.
That kind of freaks me out a little bit.
It's kind of
seriously. It's like people are going to rate your leadership, and it's going to be available on a website.
But it's also a great way to open yourself up with authenticity, because people again are very forgiving if they know you deeply care about helping the organization to a higher purpose. That you're committed to their growth and development. You're committed to great results. And you're working on it. They know you can't be perfect, but we need a clearer mechanism to allow for that dialogue to happen. I think social media is going to be a huge part of that.
Arlene?
I just wanted to add to that because I wanted to pick up on your point about, if people see you working towards achieving purpose. One of my favorite definitions of leadership is one that was given by a professor named Marshall Gans, and the definition is to enable others to achieve purpose in conditions of uncertainty. And I think, one of the things in our culture in Calgary, we pride ourselves on being entrepreneurs, which is wonderful. It's a wonderful thing to be proud of. But perhaps the dark side of that is we sometimes think we have that kind of get-her-done culture, and it means, the great man, the great woman theory that did it all on their own. When really it's about the teams and helping others achieve purpose. I mean, we know from the research that people who work in our organizations work there not because they think it's the place with the best salary or the best offices or the best benefits. They work there because they think they're doing meaningful work.
Right.
and because they're going to have opportunity to continue to do meaningful work.
It's not because they have the best software tools.
Certainly that is a part of the conversation. And I want to pick up on one of the things that Arlene said, and Juliana sort of laid the foundation for that earlier, and that's teamwork. And how people who are, in your perspective, for people who are earlier in their careers can manage between the all for one and one for all and the one for one, that sort of solo notion. How does teamwork fit in terms of leadership and developing that as a competency?
Well, I think teamwork is, again, representing my generation, if I may. That's sort of everything. And I think there tends to be a larger generational difference in terms of teamwork. I know my generation now is very concerned with feedback. We're needy. We're really, really needy. We need constant feedback.
Are you needy? Do you think I know you say that kind of as a joke, but do you really think you're needy?
Yes.
Or do you think you just need feedback?
Both, but I think it's past a certain point of just needing feedback.
Right.
I think we need consistent feedback. We need consistent tangible and intangible measurements and feedback. So whether it's a good boy praise email from our boss or a promotion, a title change, opportunity, we constantly need this sort of measurement. But in terms of your question with the teamwork, I think that one complaint I often hear from women, particularly with young women in energy, is the lack of 360 feedback available to our superiors. I know, again, I apologize, it sounds that we're always whining and complaining, but it is a piece of feedback that I often do hear, is that it tends to be a one-direction mechanism where at the end of the year, we just have feedback from our bosses down to us, and that's it. But there's never an opportunity, or there's seldom the opportunity to provide feedback to the leaders in our organization. And of course, it's not necessarily negative. It can be something along the lines of, you are a fabulous leader, and this is why, and let's do more of this. So I think in terms of teamwork, it's critically important, and ideally it would be coming from multiple dimensions rather than just one way.
Lorne, one of the things Giuliani mentioned this morning was his view that leaders are made. And so that certainly he holds that view. There is also a notion that there is a seed of potential that might be there, that you train and cultivate and coach and all that stuff, but not everybody has that seed of potential. Is that fair?
Yep.
So it's fair.
It's fair.
So one of the industrial psychologists I talked to before today said one of the new leader skills that he's trying to work with at the C level is the skill of identifying potential. That's seeing that seed and really seeing that could grow into something amazing. How do you learn that or develop that very specific skill?
I think, again, it comes down to be very clear that there's a level of skill that's got to be competent skill related to, for example, being able to lead the business. For example, in Hatfield's case, there's a certain skill competence of being an astronaut that's got to be there. The other side is the attribute side. And I think we need to sharpen our ability to really be clear about these attributes, these given set of attributes that make a recipe that will, when we invest in, will help leaders accelerate to outstanding leadership. And being able to identify that empirically, but also through story and through other evidence. And we're going to have to be a lot better of that. One of these things, Anna says, things like annual performance reviews and these things as being part of leadership are antiquated, useless ideas. And leadership needs to be capable of, one example of being able to be a tremendous coach and having that ability to give feedback in a very comprehensive way, or to find it in 360 ways that make a difference to you immediately right now in a way that inspires you and impacts you.
How would you distinguish skills and attributes? I think I know, but I'd like to hear it from you.
If you in the spirit of, say, for example, banking, it's important to be able to understand that people don't need banks, they need banking. So if you're going to be a banking executive, you better be able to understand what it means to bring banking value to customers. So that's one set of skills that goes along with that. Or if you're in the world of HR, you better have some basic skills around how the life cycle of a team member flows through an organization. The attributes, though, are around things like being hungry, being able to inspire, being able to create, be able to connect, synthesize, translate. You better have those, because you're just not going to live if you just have or you'll just be an individual contributor, which is important, but you won't be that individual that's able to take and aspire and inspire people to greatness.
In that context, is optimism a skill or an attribute?
I think it's an attribute. I think it's an absolute view around having huge contextual intelligence and knowing when to come in and to understand the context and to bring that situational leadership in a positive way, because people want to aspire to this purpose that Arlene talked about, to hope. That's what excites us.
Is it trainable, Arlene, do you think?
Well, first of all, can I just
Yes.
pick up on something that Lorne said? I'm not sure if you meant it in the narrow way that I'm going to interpret it, but when you said, if you're an individual contributor, then you won't be able to inspire and lead
I think
others.
I think you can, but a different way.
I think we need to think about leadership in a broader
Yes, I agree with
sense.
that. Yeah.
And I think it's one of the, when I was thinking about our organization, and if you asked me for an example of a great leader, I was actually going to give an example of, in your language, an individual contributor who I thought exhibited courage day in and day out. Courage, commitment, authenticity, a guy who deals with stakeholders who aren't always happy with what we're doing, but believes in the importance of developing relationship, of learning from them, of listening, being able to sit back and listen, and take that day in and day out. And this fellow, Peter McConaughey is his name, people on my team want to go to him, they want to talk to him, they want to get his advice, they want to get his encouragement, because he demonstrates what he does with such courage and commitment.
Thank
So
you. I
think
just want to
that's
thank you for
very
pointing that
important.
out, because I think individual leaders, the whole definition of leadership, there's such huge room for individual contributors. Absolutely. I do think, though, when you are given the responsibility to lead others and have resources at your hands, I think it just takes on a different context. Absolutely.
I mean, inside our organization, we actually very clearly define this concept as what we call impact without authority. And it's actually one of the measures that we use to define promotions that may not be managerial promotions. And I think, it's very interesting. You made the comment about a title change. And I think that affects people regardless of necessarily where they sit in a generational spectrum, is this idea that you can move through the organization without ever actually being a manager of people, but still be a leader. And that may not, most organizations use this concept of individual contributor, but this idea that you have the ability to you have this natural gravitational pull where people come to you and you can bring people together, you can build consensus, you can solve problems, and you do it as part of a collective organization. I think the real skill going forward for leaders is, how do we take the Peters of the world and give him the tools and capability to do that across geographic boundaries, across time zone boundaries. If you're running a global business, it's hard to get the guy in Singapore, the guy in London, the guy in Toronto on a call at the same time. So how do I build that again, impact without authority across those kind of divisional boundaries?
As a matter of fact, organizations are making room for this individual leadership. People at different points in their careers where they are not in a position, or they have some sort of elder knowledge or that kind of thing that I'm particularly excited about these days.
Why?
Yeah, exactly.
Why is that, Lauren?
Just saying, but I think definitely I just want to emphasize, I think it's beyond individual contributor, it's individual leadership for sure in the context of the whole leadership system.
I'd also just like to talk about the difference between mentorship and sponsorship, just to sort of build on this concept of identifying leaders or how best to build or develop leadership skills. I think there's a significant difference between those two concepts. I think a lot of us fall prey to armchair management, where we have the once or biannual reviews with our colleagues, and we provide feedback then and support and praise. You're doing a great job. I believe in you. It's so great to work with you, that sort of thing. Here are some specific guidance points that I can provide you with to help mentor you throughout your career. That's mentorship. That's not what we need. A lot of us, again, from my generation, are looking for sponsors. We're looking for sponsorships. So for those managers and those leaders to stick their necks out for us and provide us with the connections, provide us with the networking opportunities, provide us with the emails, the mass emails saying, you know, so-and-so's done a great job, let's provide them with opportunity X, that sort of thing. So sticking your neck out on the, or putting yourself out on the line to sponsor somebody and really take an active role in developing those younger people.
I want to talk about some of the specifics in this broader category of training, coaching, developing leaders, whatever we call it, and how formal or informal it is. I'd love for each of you to contribute to the conversation one example of something that you've seen, and I'll start with you, Arlene, one example that you've seen of something that has worked, informal or informal, in the leadership development realm. And I started my career at Procter & Gamble in the 90s, and we had a leadership training course, and we had performance management, we had all those things that one did in the 90s, but I don't think that would be the way that it would be done in 2014. So Arlene, if you were to pick one thing that you've seen that you feel really works, coaching, training, leadership, what would it be? And Mike, you're next. I know, you ready? All right.
One thing that's a
well, you could choose more than one thing.
Well, I think the Anna talked about this sponsorship relationship, and to me that really resonated because I always think when you get to that annual performance review, if there is any piece of that review that is a surprise to the person that's sitting in front of you,
right,
something has gone wrong during the year. And so that connection, that willingness to give authentic and quick feedback all the time is such an important piece. And I mean, the interesting thing, one thing I learned from a leader that was actually a challenging relationship at first. I think, Mike, you were saying sometimes feedback doesn't always feel good. Mm-hmm. And this was a bit of a challenging relationship. But what I realized is that there was always a kernel. There was always a kernel within her feedback. And that if I adjusted so that it was easy for her to give me that feedback, I would get that kernel. So I think there's a responsibility on both sides.
Right.
It's the coach being willing to be authentic and timely. And it's the receiver being willing to create an environment that makes it easy to give feedback.
Right. To really receive it. To receive it. It's great. We're going to come to your questions in a couple of minutes, but I wanted, Mike, you next on an example.
So I'm going to pick two, just because I wanted
Love
to...
it. Two's great.
I know. I wanted to go back to the skill commentary, and it kind of relates to the coaching commentary, which is my biggest pet peeve. And that is that we still need to understand and remember we are all human, whether we're customers, whether we're suppliers, whether
Except
we're
for Chris
employees.
Hadfield.
This is true, superhuman.
He's not human.
There's a few superhumans
Did you hear him
amongst
speak
us.
Russian?
That is correct.
Crazy.
But one of the things that we need to remember is the most valuable, the most impactful, the most important style of communication is human-to-human communication. The fire and forget email culture, the text messaging culture, the, I contacted them, but you didn't pick up the phone culture is a real problem. And leaders need to be able to reach out, not hide behind email, hide behind messaging, reach out and actually talk to people. And I think all of us need to emulate that capability, to be able to say, it's a human-to-human world. Doesn't matter what we do as a business. It's a human-to-human world and skills around that. And it's not just the ability to interact with human beings, it's communications. I watch emails today, written communications has taken a tremendous slide. And I would suggest to you, those of you that have leadership aspirations, building written and oral communication skills will put you in a very small category of skilled people in the future, because those are skills that are waning. The other thing I wanted to comment on was what I often refer to as confident humility. It's okay for you to believe that you're the smartest person in the room, but keep it to yourself. Because at the end of the day, that knowledge and that skill and that capability will come out on its own. It'll come out in how you interact with people. It'll come out on the end result of what you produce. What you want to do is create an environment where other people can feel confident to share their skills and their capabilities and want to contribute because they're given that environment to participate. And so this idea of, yes, continue to grow, continue to build knowledge. Rudy talked about it earlier, right? Life is a constant journey of knowledge. And always strive to be the smartest person in the room, but keep it to yourself.
You want to go, Lauren? You want to comment on
I
something?
just want to put one dib in
Okay, good.
for personal accountability.
Okay.
Because I think when you ask people, like, what's your personal leadership framework? In addition to the important thing you're going to get from others in terms of feedback and coaching. But this idea of what works comes down to this intentionality Arlene was talking about, taking the white space to reflect and say, what have I really learned? Really learned? And how am I going to apply that, practice it, get feedback whether I'm working it? So there's a dimension in here that's so much in our control that I think sometimes we forget about.
Right. Anna, one thing that you believe works in the area of training, coaching, or developing leaders?
Giving your employees the ability to make autonomous decisions. So letting go of the reins and trusting that we want to do a good job and that given the opportunity, we likely will. And even if we fall short of that, that's the start of something.
Lauren, what's one of the things that you would say, in addition to personal accountability, something in the area of training or coaching of leadership?
You've got to, in my view, that part of it is when you most learn is when you have to teach. And so whatever we build into our development process to make room always for that time to impart and to share with others. Yeah, in particular, these days we can use social media tools and those kind of tools, because I think once you really have to sit back and reflect and say, this is what I really want to impart, I think, and share and bring value to others and commit to bringing something of value, then I think the equation changes.
Okay, we're going to take some questions. If you have a question, wave your hand wildly, and Bill with our microphone. Where are you, Bill? He's somewhere. You know what? When I see a hand, I will repeat your question. There is a hand. Could you use your full voice to ask your question, and then I'll repeat it? If you could stand up. Thank you. Hello. You're very brave. Congratulations. What is your question? Okay. Our questioner works in HR, and in an oil and gas company, and she wants to know what our specific approach should be in terms of developing internal leadership programs. Yeah? Yeah. Lauren, you want to start with that?
So I think the language around programs is limiting, and I don't think it's as useful anymore. I think there's a relentless leadership system and process development that needs to take place in a never-ending way for organizations around both experiences, experiential learning, other learning, group learning, and then normal kind of classroom type, whatever the kind of cohort learning that has to take place around leading yourself, leading others, and leading the business. And I think it's a relentless process, and I think program is no longer a useful taxonomy.
Where does the accountability lie for leadership development at ATB?
It lies both with the individual, because we make a promise. We can't promise anything about employment anymore. Who can? But we can promise that that people who join ATB will be richer in every way, from a personal equity way when they leave. So part of that responsibility belongs to the individual, and then we ought to pour the hell out of investment, things like giving them more autonomy, all the experience, and we have to be intentional about it. We just can't be cavalier and say, it'll figure its way out. And I own that with my team and the other leaders.
Other questions? Wait, do you want to add something to that, Arlene?
Well,
You had this slow microphone thing.
A quick add. I think where they can be useful is where we create the space for people in, cross-functional, different businesses who can get together and collaborate and work on solving business problems and work on solutions. So where we give people the space to do that and we're clear on the outcomes that we're driving, I think it can be really useful.
Right.
Am I allowed to just add something
Are you
quickly?
allowed? You are
Is there
absolutely
rules?
allowed. Yes, you are.
And
We're empowering you.
Yeah.
We're empowering you, right.
I'm sort of repeating what I said before, but I think a formalized sponsorship program goes a long way to build accountability on both sides. So, of course, not just for the employee who's participating in the program, but also for the employer to ensure that, by the end of the year, they actually have to demonstrate how it is that they've built the people on their teams or whoever it is that they're sponsoring.
It's great. I realize I'm stealing your microphone. I totally forgot our microphone that's supposed to be running around the room is up on stage, so our mic runner couldn't possibly run it. So if you have a question, raise your hand. I'm going to be walking
There's
by.
one on the far right in
Where,
the
oh my
back.
gosh, that's
Or-
Yeah, I see
that's
far
like
right
in
in the back over
Ulaanbaatar over there. Okay, if you want to ask the next question, and then Bill, if you could come up and grab the microphone from this gentleman. Not that I'm not up to run around the room, because I'm totally up for it. Your question to our panel.
I'm just wondering, how do you guys deal with people who are making maybe poor leadership decisions and aren't being a very good leader in the organization? How do you handle that as a subordinate?
There was a lot of
Yeah,
feedback
there was a
on
lot,
that, or
if you could
echoing.
maybe just repeat the last part of the question, sorry.
How do you handle somebody who's maybe being a poor leader? We keep talking about people who are being great leaders, but dealing with somebody who's a poor leader and influencing upwards, I guess.
I mean, I think, ironically, in the current economic environment, at less than 6% unemployment, most people deal with that by walking with their feet. You know, most people, I mean, there's a standard phrase, I think it's been in HR for years, which is people don't leave companies, they leave leaders. And as other leaders, we need to be observant of that, in that if we start seeing an exodus from certain departments or certain organizations, there is potentially a clear leadership issue that exists there, and that's when you have to step in and look for ways to shore up the issue.
I think we have to have the courage to confront that, help those leaders get better. And it's got to be clear and specific, and then we owe it to them and to others to either help them get better or help them do something else that they can bring value at as quickly as possible.
I'm over here in Chestermere now with our next question. Yes, if you could ask our next question.
Yeah, thanks, folks, for the technology right now, and for the expectation of instant results, instant success, and instant rewards. It's been my experience that leadership is probably the most lonely place in the room, if not the province. And so the leaders that I've been mentored by and been inspired by are the ones who never thought for a second that they were looking for instant gratification, instant results, etc. So how do you speak to staying the course and taking that loneliness in the leadership world and turning that into great things that'll change indeed this place and this country and this world?
You want to take the
I'm going to
instant
wander this
gratification
way.
question?
I'm going to wander this way. Just give me a wave if you've got a question, and then I'll be set up for the next one. Who wants? Oh, Arlene's going to take the baton for that. Excellent. Arlene.
Well, I think your question is a perfect lead-in to reinforce just how important it is to have clear purpose within your organization. So once you are able to identify a clear purpose, a clear vision, a long-term strategy, you start looking out farther than the next, quarterly report, the next annual budget cycle, and you look, what difference are we going to make? I think that's where you start to be able to look away from the short-term thinking. But it's a real challenge. I think it's partly in our culture because we look for that short-term reward, and it is a culture where we get messages instant. They expect an instant response. So to actually carve out and say, no, we're driving change over the long term. We're here to make a difference. We're here to think about, in my case, to think about our energy future. Where are we going to meet our energy needs in a world that's going from 7 billion to 9 billion in the next 50 years? Those are big questions that require us to do a lot more than short-term thinking. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it's really important to have clear purpose.
All right, our next question is coming here from Bragg Creek. I'm at the back of the hall. You're next, if you could stand up.
I actually have two questions, both related to things that Anna said. The quick one, for sponsorship versus mentorship, is that because mentorship is no longer necessary, or because people find that they're getting enough of it and they need something additional? And secondly, regarding 360 reviews, I find that for most of my team, I need to dig. When I ask them for feedback, I get, yeah, it's fine, great, and I don't get anything constructive. Do you have any tips for actually digging out those kernels that you need from all directions?
On the first question, I think mentorship is absolutely important. I just think it's the lazy man's version of sponsorship, or lazy person's, I'm sorry. So I think it's very much necessary. On the second question, actually, it's funny. I was having a conversation with my mother last week because I was explaining to her how I was having difficulties communicating with my toddler. Go figure. And I said, I pick her up from daycare and I ask her how her day was, and she says, good. And I said, did you have fun playing with your friends? No. So long story short, it's difficult to open up the communication pathways. So if I may be so bold as to suggest or to pass on the same suggestion that my mother gave to me, not to compare your employees to my toddler, I would never do that.
Though in some ways they're probably similar.
But perhaps try using open-ended questions so they are forced to give feedback. Direct the questions so that there has to be an answer that's more than just one word.
I think just to add to that, and I'll give you a real-world example inside Microsoft. So every year we have something called MS Poll, and we require all employees to participate in this MS Poll. Now, I say require because obviously it's still voluntary, but it's all anonymous, but where managers are measured is on participation. So there's a real onus on managers to get people to participate in the survey. You can't see how people answered, right? So there's no ability to go back and say, oh, Bob gave me this rating or whatever it may be. But there is a measure on what percentage of your organization participated in the survey. And that becomes a really critical way, and it kind of goes back to the Glassdoor comment as well. These tools and these measures are only effective if they are truly crowd-sourced as opposed to clique-sourced. So if it's only 2 or 3 people, they're useless to you anyway. You need as much data as possible, and you need broad participation in order for that measure to actually mean anything.
I wonder if with all these tools and everything else that are out there, sometimes they become so burdensome and they get in the way. I wonder what would happen if all 2,000 people here just left, found a couple people that cared about them to give them the information, said, hey, give me 1 or 2 things I can really get better at that'll be meaningful, and just say thank you. Shut up, say thank you, take on it, think about it, and work on it. That'd be a powerful 360 process that could happen right now, but we turn it into elaborate tools that happen once a quarter, and people got to collect them and I think they get in the way.
I'm going to ask you for one last thought in a moment, but before I do that, Arlene, I want you to weigh in on the question of Alberta versus rest of Canada and maybe rest of world. What is different here? I mean, we know that the economy is thriving, that energy really has a dominant role in the province, but how does that manifest itself in terms of how we think about and develop leaders here? What's different here?
Well, I'm going to go back to a bit of the theme that I started down before, and that was, I think, one of the things that we pride ourselves on in Alberta and Calgary is that entrepreneurial spirit. And so, I think as we think about it in terms of leadership, it really is about what we can achieve together. I think, we need to think more about collaborating, not cooperating. We talk a lot in Suncor about that. The difference between cooperating is when you get together with a bunch of people to achieve your mutually respective goals. In collaborating, you're getting together to work together on a common goal, and that's so much harder. But I think in Alberta, it's, as entrepreneurs who have a great spirit and commitment and that get her done thing, I think it's the next generation of Albertans that will learn to collaborate more and really speed our influence and what we can achieve.
Did you want to add something?
Yeah, I think Western Canada in particular, and I put all 4 Western provinces in that bucket, and it may change in Ontario over the next few years as they restructure how the manufacturing base operates. But Western Canada is more global in its focus, in its participation. I mean, certainly coming from British Columbia, the forest industry has completely globalized itself. The energy is a global phenomenon, and we don't have that same north-south. We tend to be much more spherical in our thinking about the markets that we participate in. And as soon as you step outside the 3.5 or 4 time zones of North America, that's a very complex management ecosystem to participate in. It's multilingual, it's multi-regulatory, it's multi-currency, et cetera, that is an interesting challenge for a leader. And I think leaders going forward, how you manage staff in different geographies, how you manage across regulatory and currency boundaries, etc., all of those things make Western leaders a little bit different than leaders in the rest of the country.
Our time is almost up. I want to leave our audience here with one set of 4 thoughts. And Lorne, if you could finish this sentence. If I would leave you with one thing, it would be.
Lead yourself first, and then you can lead anybody.
Anna.
I feel like Lorne had more time to think about this.
Do you want me to come back to you?
What was the question again? No.
If I
No,
could
no, it's
leave
fine.
you with one thing. Your employees are like 2.5-year-olds.
I would say that when talking to a person, ensure that they feel like they are the most important person in the room.
Yeah, and I think to echo that same thing, and I said it earlier, don't forget the human part of human resources. And think about how you communicate with people, think about how you engage with people, and think about it from a people perspective.
Arlene.
I think, what is it that you can do to help others around you? I think, leadership sometimes can be too self-focusing and too inward-looking. So my thought is to think about, how are you influencing those around you, and what can you do to help them achieve purpose?
Fantastic. That's a great place to leave it. Arlene, Mike, Anna, and Lorne, thank you so much. A round of applause for our panelists. It's great.